Hi, I'm Brianna. My father looked me in the eye and said, "A bastard has no place in a family vacation," before slamming the car door and leaving me on the curb like trash. They toured Europe while I stood there alone, clutching a backpack, thinking it was just one betrayal. But it wasn't just one. For 15 years, they lived in the house my grandmother left me, rent-free, while calling me a parasite, a mistake, a ghost they could control. They thought I'd stay quiet, that I'd keep begging for scraps of love that never came, but what they didn't know was what I uncovered, what I did next. Ever felt like a ghost in your own family, wondering what would happen if you finally fought back? Stay with me. You're about to find out. I was 17, standing on the cracked driveway, clutching the small blue duffel bag I'd packed with second-hand jeans and a toothbrush missing bristles. The Texas sun was already crawling up my neck, but I kept my chin high as Dad slammed the trunk shut. He didn't look at me, not until Mom nudged him, her lips pursed like she was holding back some truth that would ruin breakfast. That's when he turned, his eyes cold and flat. "You're a bastard, Brianna. A bastard has no place in a family vacation." He said it like he was telling me I'd left a light on, something casual. Then he turned away, and the last thing I saw before the car door slammed was my little sister, her face hidden behind a phone, pretending not to notice me as they drove off. The tires kicked up a puff of dust that clung to my legs as the car disappeared down the street. Neighbors stood on porches, fake watering their lawns or fussing with mailboxes. Mrs. Clark across the street pulled her cardigan tighter, looking like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. No one did. They all just let it happen. I sat on the curb, the duffel bag at my feet, dust sticking to the sweat on my arms. I tried calling Dad. Straight to voicemail. I called Mom. Straight to voicemail. I called again and again until my phone battery died in my hand, leaving me staring at the black screen, feeling like it was laughing at me. By sunset, I was still there, trying to make myself invisible as cars passed, slowing down to take a look. Some of them, I knew. They were the people who smiled at me at church or waved at the grocery store, and now they couldn't look me in the eye. When the streetlights flickered on, I picked up my bag and walked. I didn't know where to go, so I kept to the shadows, slipping behind hedges when cars drove by. I ended up at the park, the one where I used to ride the swings when I was 8, when Dad would push me so high I thought I could touch the clouds. I sat on a bench, hugging my bag to my chest, and watched the sprinklers kick on, the mist catching in the lights like tiny stars. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but something in me was too tired for tears. I counted my breaths to keep from shaking, telling myself over and over, "You'll be okay." The night was longer than I'd ever known a night could be. Every rustle in the bushes made me flinch. Every distant car horn made me sit up, thinking maybe they'd change their minds. But no one came. When the sky finally turned that soft gray before sunrise, I stood up, bones aching from the hard bench, and started the walk back home. I could smell the dew on the grass, the faint scent of gasoline from the morning traffic picking up. As I turned the corner onto my street, I saw them before I saw the house. Black trash bags piled on the porch like leftover garbage. It took me a second to realize it was my stuff. Clothes, shoes, a framed photo of Grandma and me. The glass cracked, sticking out of the top of a bag. I froze, the air around me thick and heavy. The front door had a new lock, a silver one that caught the light, glinting like a warning. I tried the handle anyway, pressing my hand against the wood, hoping it would give. It didn't. Mrs. Clark's screen door creaked and she called out softly, "Sweetheart, you need somewhere to go?" I shook my head. Shame sat in my throat like a stone, too heavy to swallow. She stood there for a moment before closing the door, leaving me alone again. I dragged the trash bags off the porch one by one, lining them up against the wall. One of them ripped, and a folder fell out, papers spilling across the concrete. I knelt, hands shaking, as I gathered them. That's when I saw it, a copy of Grandma's will, my name printed in black ink, saying I owned a quarter of this house. I sat there for what felt like hours, the sun rising, people driving by on their way to work, ignoring the girl sitting on the sidewalk with a torn folder in her lap. Grandma had told me, "You'll always have a place here." I guess she believed it when she wrote those words, but even with that paper in my hands, I felt smaller than ever. I was 17, legally part owner of a home that had locked me out, with a family who would rather throw my life into trash bags than look me in the eye. I pulled out a small keychain from the pile, the one Grandma gave me on my 10th birthday. It was cheap, the letters a little faded, but it still read, "Family First." I held it so tight my fingers hurt, whispering those words again and again, trying to believe they meant something. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat on the curb, clutching that keychain, watching the house I partly owned, wondering how long it would take before they realized they would need me. I didn't let the words slip from my memory. The day I stood on that curb whispering, "Someday, you will need me." I meant it. I just didn't know it would take 15 years for that day to come knocking, quiet and relentless, like the rain tapping on my apartment window at 3 in the morning when sleep refused to visit. I drive past the house every week, part habit, part promise I made to myself. It sits on the corner of Elm and Sycamore in Houston, the paint now a washed-out white, the lawn patchy despite the sprinkler system Dad brags about to the neighbors. They still live there, comfortably, as if nothing ever happened, as if I'm a ghost that never deserved a place at the dinner table. I'm 32 now. I work as a paralegal at a small firm downtown, organizing other people's chaos while my own sits heavy in my chest. My apartment is small but clean, the walls bare except for a framed photo of Grandma holding my hand on my 6th birthday, both of us smiling like we didn't know life could turn cold so quickly. Every year when the property tax bill arrives in my mailbox, I pay it. I tell myself it's for Grandma, that she wouldn't want the house she fought for to be swallowed up by the bank. They don't thank me for it. They don't even acknowledge it. At Christmas, when I stop by with a store-bought pie, they call me a guest, telling the neighbors, "Oh, she's just visiting," like I'm some distant relative, not the girl who kept them from losing the roof over their heads. I let them pretend. It was easier that way for a while. I watched them repaint the shutters, install a new porch light, host barbecues where Dad would stand in the driveway, beer in hand, telling his buddies about family. Sometimes they would look at me, standing on the edges of their lives, and give me that polite smile that says, "You're here," but not really. A few weeks ago, I decided to buy a small condo, a place to call my own. I was tired of renting, of living in a space that never felt like it was mine. Sitting across from the loan officer, I handed over my documents, trying to ignore the tremble in my hands. I wanted this. I needed this. But the look on the loan officer's face told me something was wrong. "There's already a home equity line tied to your name, Ms. Ruiz," she said, flipping the screen toward me. My name was there, tied to an address I knew too well, the house on Elm and Sycamore. I don't remember driving home that day. The world blurred, my fingers numb on the steering wheel. In my living room, I pulled out the paperwork, reading the fine print until the words turned into static. My father's signature was on the documents, bold and familiar, the same signature that used to sign my report cards. They used my name, my social security number to get money for their renovations, the ones they'd brag about to everyone, the new porch, the sprinkler system, the vacations they took, all of it funded by the piece of me they never acknowledged. When I confronted Dad, he sat in his recliner, the TV flashing sports highlights behind him. He didn't look at me, just sipped his beer and let out a low laugh. "You're paranoid, Brianna. Always making drama out of nothing." I held up the papers, my voice steady. "You used my name, my credit, without asking me." He set the beer down, leaning forward with that look that used to make me shrink. "You should be grateful we let you come around at all. Remember when you were left behind? Maybe you should think about why that happened." Mom didn't say a word, just kept folding laundry in the corner, eyes fixed on the TV. My siblings stood there too, arms crossed, echoing his words with their silence. "You're lucky you're not on the street," my brother muttered, not meeting my eyes. "After everything we've done for you," my sister added, her voice sharp. "You're going to bring this up now?" The room felt small, the air thick, but I didn't back down this time. I didn't let the old fear creep in. I folded the papers, slipping them into my purse, and walked out the front door, their words sticking to my skin like humidity. That evening, I parked across the street, headlights off, watching the house as they moved inside, lights flicking on from room to room. I stepped out of the car, walking to the fence, pressing my hand against the rough wood. The moonlight caught the edges of the house, making it look almost peaceful. I made a promise then, one I whispered into the night so only I could hear it. "You won't erase me, not this time." I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to fight on their terms. I was done letting them define what family meant, done letting them decide if I belonged. As I turned to leave, the front porch light flicked off, plunging the yard into darkness. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush. Walking back to my car, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the humid air fill my lungs. I knew what I needed to do. I was no longer that 17-year-old left on the curb. I was stronger now, quieter, but stronger. I drove away from that house with the streetlights blurring past, whispering to myself, "You'll see what a parasite can do." It wasn't a threat I planned to shout at them. It was a quiet promise to myself, the kind that sits under your ribs until the day you keep it. I parked in front of my apartment, letting the engine tick as it cooled, hands resting on the steering wheel until the tension in my shoulders eased enough to move. Upstairs, I didn't bother turning on the TV or the radio for company. The silence felt like a companion tonight as I dropped my keys on the counter and pulled out the file box from under the kitchen table. The overhead light flickered, but I didn't care. I spread the papers across the table. Old deeds, yellowed tax forms, letters from my grandmother with her careful cursive, and copies of documents I'd quietly requested from the county clerk's office over the years. I traced her handwriting with my finger, remembering how she used to tuck notes into my lunchbox with a smiley face and "family first, sweetheart." I wanted to believe that meant something, even if the rest of them never did. I lined up signatures, one next to the other, scanning the loops of letters and the angle of the slant. My father's signature on the home equity papers looked too much like the one on the trust transfer forms from Grandma's account, documents I had found in a locked drawer after she passed. It hit me slowly, like cold water dripping down my spine, that the funds meant for my college tuition were drained, bit by bit, under the label of family expenses. Family expenses that looked suspiciously like a new SUV in the driveway, vacation photos of them smiling in Rome while I stood at 17 on that driveway, alone with a backpack slipping off my shoulder, too ashamed to knock on a neighbor's door for help. Their laughter over plates of pasta in Italy had been funded by the future I was told I wasn't smart enough to need. I pressed my palms flat on the table, letting the betrayal settle where it belonged, in the space between grief and resolve. I wasn't going to let this break me. Not this time. My phone buzzed with a low battery warning, reminding me to plug it in. I moved to the small living room, rummaging through boxes I hadn't opened in years, searching for the one marked Grandma. Inside, tucked between her church cookbooks and the quilt she made for me when I turned 10, was the old answering machine she kept by her recliner. I carried it back to the kitchen, sitting down with a careful breath before pressing play. The machine whirred to life, clicking before her voice, soft but clear, filled the room. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Grandma. I just wanted to remind you that the house is yours, okay? No matter what they say, it's yours." The message ended, the click echoing in the room. I closed my eyes, clutching the machine against my chest, letting the tears gather without letting them fall. Validation can feel like a wound reopening, but it also feels like air rushing back into your lungs when you didn't know you'd stopped breathing. I sat there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, thinking about how many times they'd told me I was nothing, that I was never meant to be part of this family, that I was just a mistake. Meanwhile, they were living in what was mine, using my credit, calling me ungrateful when I showed up with pie on holidays, pretending I didn't exist while they lived off what I held together for them. The world outside was quiet, cars passing on the main road with a hush, dogs barking a few houses down, life moving while I stayed still for a moment, letting the anger simmer into something colder, sharper. I tucked the papers back into the file box, sliding the voicemail onto my phone, backing it up twice before locking it away. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark street, the streetlight casting a pale glow on the cracked pavement. You stole my place. You took my future. You called me a parasite, I whispered, steady and clear. But you will see me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine, honoring Grandma's memory, and proving to myself that I was never the mistake they tried to make me believe I was. I sat down at the table again, flipping open my laptop, the glow illuminating the determination in my reflection. My fingers hovered over the keys before I opened my email, pulling up the contact for a lawyer I had researched months ago, just in case I ever found the courage to do this. The subject line was empty for a moment before I typed, "I'm ready." And I hit send. I didn't sleep much after hitting send. I lay on my back, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as the ceiling fan hummed softly above me, the sound a steady reminder that the world kept turning, even when everything inside felt like it was shifting. By morning, the Houston air felt thick, a promise of heat pressing against the windows before the sun had fully risen. I made coffee, letting the bitter steam rise as I sat by the kitchen table, the same table where I had once lined up my grandmother's letters like a prayer. My phone chimed, and I saw the lawyer's name, Carter, pop up with a time, 2 p.m. today. "Let's talk," was all it said. I spent the morning sorting papers into neat stacks, double-checking the files, making sure nothing was missing. Each document felt heavier than paper should, like it carried the weight of every time I had stayed silent at family gatherings while they laughed, passing around photos of their trips, calling me the quiet one, as if that was all I would ever be. By the time I parked outside Carter's office, the afternoon heat shimmered off the sidewalks, the air pushing against me like a wall as I stepped out of the car, clutching the file box close to my chest. The building was small, tucked between a barber shop and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon, the kind of place you'd walk by without noticing. Inside, the office smelled of old leather chairs and printer ink, the cool air buzzing softly. Carter, a woman in her 40s with hair pulled back in a loose bun and a gaze that seemed to see everything, motioned me to sit. I placed the box on the table between us and opened it, spreading out the papers and the printed transcript of my grandmother's voicemail. Carter scanned them quietly, her eyes moving fast, hands flipping pages with a practiced calm. Then she looked up, her expression tightening. "Brianna, I need you to brace yourself." She turned her laptop around so I could see the screen, showing public records I had never seen before, with my name tied to multiple loans and liens I didn't recognize, my name, my social security number, all attached to debts I never knew existed. Carter's voice was low, steady, but each word felt like it was chipping away at something inside me. "Your father used your information to take out loans against the house. He's made it look like you're in debt, that you can't manage your finances. That's why, when you've tried to speak up, they've called you irresponsible, a parasite. It was never about you being useless. It was about them covering their tracks." I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. Memories crashed back. My father's voice during those holiday dinners, telling me to be grateful, that I should be lucky they let me around. My siblings' dismissive glances, the way they would smirk and change the subject whenever I mentioned my bills, my struggles, acting like I was incompetent. "They've been using me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, "all this time." Carter nodded, tapping the screen, pulling up another document. "And it gets worse. They're in the process of selling the house. Within 60 days, it will belong to an investment company. They've used a power of attorney with your signature on it to sign the sale." I stared at the document, seeing my name in neat script, a perfect match for the way I used to sign birthday cards, the way I signed thank you notes to neighbors. The familiarity made me sick. "They forged my signature," I said, each word slow, deliberate, the anger starting to burn away the shock. "They did," Carter confirmed, her tone steady but sympathetic. "They're planning to walk away with the money while you're left with nothing." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I needed air. Carter didn't stop me as I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me. The heat hit me, the humidity wrapping around me as I leaned against the brick wall, pressing my hand against it to steady myself. Tears came, hot and fast, running down my cheeks as I let myself feel it all for the first time. Every insult, every lie, every dinner where I was made to feel less, every glance that told me I wasn't enough. I let the tears fall because it was the last time I would cry for them. "They will not take this from me," I whispered to myself, letting the words ground me. I wiped my face, taking in a deep breath, tasting the heat in the air before turning back inside. Carter looked up as I re-entered, her eyes searching mine for hesitation. "File the injunction," I said, sitting down, my voice steady. "Freeze everything. I'm done letting them write the narrative." Carter nodded, reaching for a folder. "This will get ugly, Brianna. Are you ready for that?" I looked at her. No longer the 17-year-old left on the driveway with a backpack, no longer the quiet one sitting in the corner while they laughed. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Carter's words hung in the air, but I didn't flinch. I leaned forward, pressing my palms against the cool surface of the conference table, letting the quiet between us speak for me. She studied my face, waiting for any sign of doubt, but all she found was a steadiness I hadn't even known I carried until now. "I was born in the middle of their mess. I'm ready," I told her, my voice even, letting each word fall with the weight it deserved. We spent the next 2 hours finalizing paperwork, Carter explaining every line as I signed, each signature a small reclaiming of the power I had let them steal piece by piece over the years. We drafted the cease and desist letter together, Carter making sure the language was airtight, every phrase ensuring that my father's attorney would understand there was no room for negotiation or delay. As the clock hit noon, the courier arrived, a young man with a calm smile who took the envelope as if it were nothing more than a routine delivery, not the start of a war. I walked back to my car under the harsh sun, the pavement radiating heat through my shoes, and sat for a moment with the engine off, letting the silence wrap around me. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with my father's name. I let it ring, the vibrations rattling against the console before it stopped. It started again, then again, until finally I answered, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. "What the hell is this, Brianna?" His voice was a harsh bark, the same tone he used to scold me when I was a child for crying too loudly, for asking questions he didn't want to answer. "You think you can embarrass this family? You think you can pull this stunt and just—" I hung up. I didn't need to hear the rest. I drove home, the streets a blur as I replayed his voice in my head, the way it cracked around the edges when he was truly afraid. I parked and went inside, placing my keys on the small table by the door, taking a deep breath as I sat down to wait. It didn't take long. That evening, I received a message from my stepmother, asking, no, demanding, that I come to the house for a family discussion. She wrote that my father deserved to speak his piece and that it was time to end this nonsense before it tore the family apart. Funny how they only called it nonsense when it was my life on the line. The next day, I drove to the house that was partly mine, but had never felt like home. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain that hadn't yet come. I parked across the street, sitting for a moment before stepping out, smoothing down my shirt, lifting my chin as I crossed the road. The porch light was on, even though it was midday, casting a yellow glow over the front steps where I had once sat, waiting for them to come back from Europe, my backpack at my feet. I knocked once before opening the door, stepping into the living room where they were all gathered, my father, stepmother, step-siblings, even a few cousins who had taken the day off work to be here, all of them waiting, watching. "Brianna," my father began, his voice calm, measured, the way he always sounded when he was about to say something cruel. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this has to stop." I didn't respond. I set the file box down on the coffee table, opened it, and began pulling out papers, placing them one by one in front of him. Property documents, bank statements, the printed transcript of my grandmother's voicemail, the forged power of attorney, highlighted in yellow so no one could claim they missed it. "What's this?" my stepmother demanded, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up one of the papers, eyes scanning the words before flicking up to me. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the truth." They started talking over each other then, accusations, insults, dismissals. My father called me ungrateful, a leech, told me I was tearing the family apart over a few misunderstandings. My stepmother said I was confused, that I didn't understand how grown-up things worked. A cousin muttered that I was making a fool of myself, that family was more important than money. I let them talk until the room fell into a tense silence, the papers rustling as my father set them down, his jaw tight, eyes cold. "You will not steal from me and call it love," I said, letting each word land, letting them hear the certainty in my voice. My father's nostrils flared, his mouth opening as if to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. I turned to look at every person in that room, meeting their eyes, forcing them to see me, really see me, for the first time. "I'm not here to ask you for anything," I continued. "I'm here to tell you that this ends now. Confess and make it right, or I will see you in court." The room was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, each second loud in the quiet. My stepmother's face drained of color, her eyes darting to my father, who was staring at me with a look I couldn't quite place, part anger, part fear, part something else I didn't care to name. Behind me, a cousin cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Another stepped back, arms crossing as if to distance himself from the moment. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. My father leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, knuckles white. He clenched his jaw, his lips barely moving as he whispered, "You don't know what you're starting." I leaned in just enough so he could see that I was not the child he left on the driveway all those years ago. I let him see that I was no longer afraid. "I think I do," I said softly. "I'm finishing what you started," I whispered back, letting the words hang in the stale air before I turned and walked out of the house, ignoring the echoes of disbelief and anger that rose behind me. The Houston heat wrapped around me as I stepped off the porch, grounding me as I took a steady breath. I didn't look back at the house I once believed I'd belong to, letting the screen door slam shut on a chapter I would not allow to define me any longer. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the city still quiet outside my window as I made coffee, the mug warming my hands as I scrolled through emails Carter had sent overnight. The cease and desist had been received. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm I knew was coming. By midday, I felt the ripples of their retaliation. A neighbor I'd known since I was a kid wouldn't meet my eyes as she passed me on the sidewalk, pulling her dog closer, her jaw tight. At the corner store, Mrs. Klein, who had always slipped an extra cookie into my hand when I was small, avoided me, pretending to fuss with the coffee lids as I stood behind her. At church on Sunday, the usual nods and small smiles were replaced by turned shoulders and hushed conversations that stopped the moment I walked by. The whispers were loud enough to hear without words. "She's after the family house. She's greedy. She's unstable." Later that afternoon, sitting on my couch with a stack of unopened mail beside me, my phone buzzed with a message from Alex, my cousin who had always kept his distance from family drama until now. "Brianna, you need to see this." Attached were screenshots from a family group chat I had never been included in, messages scrolling like a slow-motion wreck across my screen. My father's words hit hardest. "She's trying to take everything from us. We need to handle this before the courts get involved." My stepmother's reply, "We'll get her to sign off one way or another. She won't even know." Alex's final message, "They're planning to forge your signature again." "I'm sorry." I set the phone down, the room tilting for a moment as the betrayal pressed against my ribs like a weight I couldn't shake off. I sat in that silence, letting the truth settle, letting the hurt burn clean through me until there was nothing left but a cold, clear certainty. They would not break me. They would not get away with this. That evening, I called Carter, her calm voice on the other end grounding me as I explained what I had learned. She didn't interrupt, just listened as I laid out the screenshots, the rumors, the plan to steal what was mine before the law could protect me. "We'll get ahead of this," she said finally, her voice sharp, a note of steel that reminded me why I had trusted her in the first place. "We'll document everything, we'll freeze every account, and we'll make sure they can't move an inch without consequences." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, staring out the window as the streetlights flickered on one by one, cars passing below like steady breaths in the quiet night. "Thank you," I managed, my voice low but steady. After we hung up, I walked through my small apartment, collecting the documents, the files, the evidence that had become the foundation of my quiet war. I made copies, stored them in different places, set up cameras near my doors, and secured my laptop with new passwords. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. As I moved, I thought about the cost of this fight, the family dinners that would never happen, the birthdays I wouldn't be invited to, the hollow apologies I would never hear. I let myself mourn them just for a moment before letting them go, making room for the resolve that took their place. I pulled out the small keychain my grandmother had given me, the one that read, "Family First," running my thumb over the worn letters as I stood in the doorway of my kitchen. The irony was not lost on me, but the words felt different now, like a promise I was making to myself, not to them. Family first, I thought, but not at the cost of my dignity, my future, or my name. Late that night, as the city settled into its hush, I sat down at my kitchen table, the weight of everything pressing down but not crushing me. I opened my laptop, typing out my next steps with Carter, each keystroke a refusal to back down, each plan a step toward reclaiming what they tried to erase. As I sent the final email, confirming the plan to lock down my accounts and file the injunction first thing in the morning, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "If they want a war," I whispered into the darkness of my kitchen, "I will give them one." I pressed the end button on the call with Carter, the screen going dark as I set my phone down on the counter. I stood there for a moment, letting the stillness of the kitchen hold me as the weight of the words I had spoken settled in the room around me. If they wanted a war, they would get one. Sleep didn't come easily that night, my mind racing with details and preparations, my body tense with anticipation for the morning ahead. When dawn broke, pale light filtering through the blinds, I was already up, coffee brewing as I reviewed the files once more, each page a reminder of why I could not back down. I chose a simple black dress, pulled my hair into a neat bun, and applied makeup with a steady hand, my reflection looking back at me with calm determination. Grabbing the folder of documents and the small flash drive, I took one last breath before stepping out the door, locking it behind me. The drive to the courthouse felt like a passage, every stoplight a quiet moment to remind myself that I was not that 17-year-old girl left on the driveway. I was not the quiet, invisible daughter they thought they could erase. I was here to reclaim what was mine. Walking into the courthouse lobby, the cold air conditioning hit my skin, a stark contrast to the warm humidity outside. The marble floors echoed with the shuffle of shoes, hushed conversations drifting through the space as people waited for their hearings. I found Carter near the elevators, her briefcase in hand, her eyes meeting mine with a silent nod. "You ready?" she asked, voice low. "More than ready," I replied, my grip tightening on the folder. We walked through the metal detectors and down the long hallway toward the courtroom. My heels clicked against the floor, steady, measured, each step a reminder to myself to stay grounded, to stay focused. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected, the wooden benches lined with people I recognized, cousins, church friends, neighbors who had taken a side long before they knew the truth. My father sat at the front with his lawyer, his posture rigid, eyes avoiding mine. My stepmother sat beside him, her hand on his arm like a warning. We took our seats, Carter leaning over to whisper, "Stay calm, let them talk first." The judge entered, and the room settled into tense silence. The proceedings began. my father's lawyer standing confidently as he approached the bench, presenting a document I hadn't seen before. My stomach turned as I heard the words, "Your Honor, we have a signed affidavit here showing that Ms. Brianna voluntarily relinquished her rights to the property in question over a decade ago." A murmur rippled through the room, heads turning toward me, eyes filled with confusion, some with judgment. I glanced at the judge, his gaze shifting from the document to me, waiting for a response. I took a breath, steadying my voice as I stood. "Your Honor, I would like to address the court." The judge nodded, and I stepped forward, my shoes silent on the carpet as I handed over my folder of documents to the clerk, who passed them up to the bench. I glanced around the room, seeing familiar faces, people who had once smiled at me on Sundays now watching with thinly veiled curiosity. "That document is a forgery," I said, my voice clear, unwavering. "I never signed away my rights, and I have proof that not only was my signature forged, but funds from my trust were used without my consent to remodel the property, placing it under my father's and stepmother's names." And Carter stood, passing me the small flash drive we had prepared. The clerk took it to the court's computer, and the judge nodded for the playback to begin. The audio crackled before a familiar voice filled the room, my father's voice. "She was too naive to notice the papers we switched," his voice said, cold and matter-of-fact. "It was easy enough to get her signature on the trust transfer, and once the renovations were done, it was ours." Gasps moved through the room, whispers rising as people exchanged glances, their eyes shifting from me to my father, who sat frozen, his face pale, mouth tightening as the recording continued. "She thinks she has a claim, but she doesn't know what she's talking about," his voice said again, each word slicing through the silence like a blade. When the recording ended, the courtroom felt charged, the air thick with disbelief and the sting of reality settling into every corner. My father's lawyer tried to speak, stumbling over his words, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. I looked at my father, meeting his eyes for the first time in months. There was something new there. Fear, uncertainty, the realization that the narrative he had crafted was falling apart in front of witnesses who had believed him without question. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I stood there, letting the truth speak louder than anything I could say, letting the weight of his betrayal be witnessed by the people who once whispered behind my back. The judge cleared his throat, addressing my father's lawyer. "We will take a recess to review this new evidence. I suggest you and your client prepare a clear explanation for these allegations." As the judge exited, the room erupted in murmurs, people shifting in their seats, their eyes darting between me and my father. My stepmother reached for his hand, but he pulled away, his jaw clenched, eyes avoiding mine as he gathered his papers with shaking hands. I turned to leave, Carter beside me, her hand on my shoulder in quiet support. As we stepped into the hallway, the buzz of conversation behind us, I heard my father's voice calling my name, sharp, desperate. "Brianna." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I kept walking, each step down the hallway a step away from the lies they had built, each breath a reclaiming of the space they had tried to take from me. I didn't slow my steps as I left the courthouse, the afternoon sun warm against my skin while the sounds of traffic hummed around me. Behind me I could hear him calling my name, sharp and desperate, but I kept walking. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For a moment I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, letting the wave of adrenaline pass before I turned the key and drove away, the courthouse disappearing in my rearview mirror. The drive home felt longer than usual, every stoplight giving me space to think, to let the fear settle into resolve. My phone vibrated with texts and missed calls from cousins and church members who had been in that courtroom, their curiosity buzzing through the screen, but I ignored them. I wasn't here to explain myself anymore. By the time I turned onto my street, the sky was shifting into dusk, the air heavy with that Houston humidity that made your clothes stick to your skin. I pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires, and there he was, pacing on my porch, arms folded, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. I sat in the car for a moment, letting the engine idle, watching him through the windshield. His posture was restless, agitated, like a man trying to rehearse the words that might save him. I turned off the ignition, grabbed my bag, and stepped out, each step measured as I approached the walkway leading up to the porch. "You think you've done something big, huh?" He spat the words before I even reached the steps, his voice already rising with that familiar edge of anger. I didn't respond, just kept walking until I was standing in front of him, the space between us filled with the tension of everything unsaid. "You think you're some kind of hero, dragging your family's name through the mud?" he continued, stepping closer, his finger pointing at me as if trying to shrink me back into the silence he preferred. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I kept my eyes on him, steady, letting him see that I wasn't going to shrink. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You lied, you stole, and you used me to do it." His face twisted, shifting from anger to mockery. "Ungrateful, that's what you are. Everything you have is because of me, and now you want to act like some victim?" He laughed, a harsh sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You think the police are going to care about your sob story?" I opened my bag, pulling out a small stack of papers and holding them up between us. "This isn't a story, it's evidence. I've filed a criminal complaint and they'll be here soon." I kept my tone even, refusing to match his volume, refusing to let him pull me into that chaos. His eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing his face before he masked it with rage again. "You're tearing this family apart, Brianna. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." I took a breath, steadying myself against the ache that mention of her name always brought. "No," I replied, my voice quiet but cutting through the air between us. "She would be ashamed of you." His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might hit me, the way his shoulders tensed and his jaw worked as he tried to find the words that might make this go away. "She left that house to me," I continued, my voice steady. "You used her trust, her love for you, to take what wasn't yours, and you thought you'd get away with it because I wouldn't fight back." I shook my head. "You were wrong." He took a step back, shaking his head, his face pale under the porch light that had just flickered on. "You're destroying me," he whispered, voice cracking, the anger collapsing into something desperate. "No," I corrected him. "You destroyed yourself the day you decided I didn't matter." We stood there, the cicadas humming in the heavy evening air, neighbors watching from across the street, their blinds shifting as they peeked out to see the confrontation playing out on my porch. I felt their eyes, but I didn't care. This was between him and me. "You're going to regret this," he tried one last time, his voice low, almost pleading now. I shook my head again, feeling a calm I hadn't known I was capable of. "No, Dad, I'm finally doing what I should have done a long time ago." We both turned at the sound of tires on gravel, the red and blue lights of a patrol car reflecting off the windows of my house as it pulled up to the curb. The officers stepped out, their radios crackling softly as they approached. My father's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him as he looked from the officers to me, realization dawning on his face that this was truly over. I took a deep breath, the humid air filling my lungs as I felt the weight lift from my chest, not in victory, but in the quiet relief of finally ending the cycle. As the officers approached, I turned to the door, keys in hand, ready to step inside and close it on this chapter of my life. I closed the door gently behind me as the flashing lights faded, the night air settling back into quiet. For a moment I stood in the hallway, the echo of that final whisper still vibrating in my chest. It's finally time to start living. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the grain of the paint under my palm, grounding myself. This house had seen me as a child, as a teenager hiding in corners, as a woman fighting to reclaim herself. Now, it was just me, no shadows waiting to pounce, no footsteps in the hall reminding me of the power I didn't have. Morning came softly, sunlight slipping through the curtains, landing across my pillow. I woke to the sound of birds outside, not the vibration of threats on my phone or the weight of silence pressing down on me. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around my shoulders as I walked to the kitchen, the wood floor cool beneath my feet. I brewed a cup of coffee and stood by the window, watching the light spill over the fence, breathing in the promise of a new day. The phone rang, its tone sharp in the quiet, but this time I didn't hesitate to answer. It was Carter, his voice steady, yet carrying the relief we both felt. "It's done," he said. "The accounts are frozen. Your father is facing charges for fraud and elder abuse, and the house is yours, Brianna, legally, completely. No one can contest it." I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. It was over. The fight, the courtroom battles, the endless nights of digging through paperwork to prove what I had always known in my bones. It was all over. I thanked him, promising to meet later for the final signatures, and hung up, placing the phone on the counter with a careful calm. I walked through each room slowly, letting the memories come as they chose. The corner where I used to sit with a book, trying to drown out the yelling. The hallway where I once stood, listening to the family leave for Europe, the suitcase by my feet as the door slammed. The kitchen table where I ate in silence, pretending the coldness didn't reach me. My hand brushed over the doorway where my grandmother used to stand, smiling softly, telling me that one day, this would be mine, and I would be safe. She was gone, but I had kept that promise, to her and to myself. Later that afternoon, I took a single white flower, the one I had kept from the day they left me behind, and drove to the cemetery. The sky was a gentle blue, the breeze carrying the scent of cut grass and earth. I found her grave, kneeling down as I placed the flower at the headstone, brushing away a fallen leaf. "I kept your promise," I whispered, my voice steady, though tears pressed behind my eyes. "I kept myself." I stayed there for a while, letting the quiet hold me. There was grief, yes, grief for the years stolen, for the family I had fought to keep even as they tried to erase me. But beneath it was a softer feeling, something like hope, something like the beginning of peace. When I returned home, I opened the windows wide, letting the fresh air sweep through the rooms, clearing out the old memories that no longer had power over me. I made another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood live its life. The mailman walking his route, children laughing on their bikes, a couple walking their dog. Normalcy, the kind I had always longed for, felt closer now than it ever had before. As the camera turned on for my final message, I looked into it, holding the gaze of those who would find themselves in my story. "Sometimes," I began, my voice soft but firm, "your family's silence is the loudest betrayal you will ever face. They will tell you that you don't belong, that your worth is tied to your obedience, to your silence." I paused, letting the truth settle between us. "But you can break free. Even if it takes years, even if it costs you everything you thought you needed, you can choose yourself." I leaned back slightly, exhaling, letting the tension leave my shoulders. "Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own family? What did you do to reclaim your voice?" I asked, letting the question be an invitation, a door opening for others who needed to speak. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm light across the floor, I turned off the camera and sat for a moment in the quiet, a quiet that felt earned, not forced upon me. This house, these rooms, my life, they were mine now, not because someone gave them to me, but because I fought for them, for myself. I lifted my coffee, taking a slow sip, the warmth grounding me, the taste reminding me that life could be simple, even in its complexity. I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was finally, irrevocably, mine.